For 1095 days, I was a ghost of my own making. I did not cry at the wedding that never happened, but the echo of it was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my life. The first thing I learned in my new existence was the art of becoming small. I chose a name as common as a polished stone in a riverbed, Kim Minute Seo. I found a room in a district of Seoul so densely packed with life it rendered any single person invisible. And I took a job that rewarded silence and efficiency above all else. I served tea. I served it in the sky, on the 47th floor of a glass tower that looked down on the city like a silent, calculating god. The Gilded Lotus was a place of hushed transactions, where fortunes were made and lost in the space between the first and second steeping of a rare oolong. My uniform was a shapeless tunic and trousers in a shade of grey that seemed to absorb light. My hair, which once fell to my waist in a sheet of black silk, was scraped back into a bun so tight it pulled at my temples, a constant, dull ache that reminded me of my purpose. No makeup. No jewelry. My posture was a carefully constructed slump, my gaze perpetually fixed on a point 3 feet in front of my shoes. I was a background element, a necessary, but unnoticed piece of machinery. I was safe. He was a feature of the tea room, much like the meticulously raked sand in the lobby garden, or the single, perfect camellia that floated in a bowl on the reception desk. He came every Tuesday and Thursday at precisely 3 o'clock. He always sat in the corner booth, the one that offered a panoramic view of the city's sprawl and the distant, hazy mountains. The other servers were terrified of him. They spoke of him in whispers in the staff kitchen, their voices tight with a mixture of fear and awe. Kwon Ji-hoon. The name itself seemed to carry weight. They said he owned the building. They said he owned half the district. They said things that were darker still, things I chose not to listen to. To me, he was simply order number 37, a first flush Darjeeling, served without sugar or milk, the water heated to exactly 85 degrees Celsius. I learned this on my third day, when my senior colleague, her hands trembling, had begged me to take the order for her. I did. I did because I was not afraid of a man in a suit. I was afraid of something else entirely, something I had run from for 3 years. A man in a suit was just a customer. For 6 months, this was our silent rhythm. I would see his car, a low-slung black sedan that drank the light, pull up to the curb below. I would prepare the tea. Mr. Choi, his driver and guard, a man built of granite and sheer intimidation, would enter first, his eyes scanning the room in a single, sweeping motion. Then Kwon Ji-hoon would follow. The room would not fall silent, it was already silent, but the quality of the silence would change. It would thicken, become denser, charged with his presence. He moved with a liquid grace that was at odds with his stillness. He never hurried. He never gestured expansively. He would simply take his seat, and the world of the Gilded Lotus would reorient itself around him. I would approach, place the tray on his table, and retreat. He never looked at me. He never spoke to me. He would simply incline his head a fraction of an inch, a gesture so small it was almost imperceptible. This was the entirety of our interaction. It was predictable. It was controlled. And so, it was safe. I told myself his indifference was my shield. I knew even as I thought it that I was lying. It wasn't indifference. It was a complete lack of acknowledgement. To him, I was no different from the porcelain cup or the wooden tray. An object. That was what I wanted. It had to be. The day it changed was a Tuesday in April. The air was thick with the promise of rain, and the city below was a smear of grey and muted neon. A new girl, barely 19, was on her first shift. She was nervous, her movements jerky and uncertain. She was carrying a heavy tray of used crockery, her eyes wide with the terror of a fawn on a highway. I saw the disaster before it happened. I saw her foot catch on the edge of the carpet. I saw the tray tilt. Time seemed to stretch, the way it does before an impact. The clatter of porcelain would shatter the tea room's sacred quiet. The manager would be apoplectic. The girl would be fired. And all of it would happen 4 feet from Kwon Ji-hoon's table. I didn't think. I moved. I crossed the space in 3 quick, silent steps, my hand shooting out to steady the bottom of the tray while my other hand righted a toppling teapot. For a moment, the two of us stood there, a strange tableau of frozen catastrophe. The girl stared at me, her mouth a perfect O of shock. I took the tray from her trembling hands. "Go," I mouthed. She fled. I turned to clear the mess, my movements economical and swift, my entire being focused on erasing the incident, on sinking back into my grey invisibility. And then I felt it. A gaze. It was heavy, tangible, a physical weight on the back of my neck. I finished arranging the cups on my own tray, and, against my better judgment, I turned. Kwon Ji-hoon was looking at me. Not at the wall behind me, not at the space I occupied, but at me. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but they were not vacant. They were assessing. For the first time in 6 months, he saw a person. The silence that followed was different from all the silences that had come before. It was not empty. It was a question. I held his gaze for 2 seconds. I counted. 1, 2. It was 2 seconds longer than the conversation required. Then I broke contact, picked up my tray, and walked away. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. It was the first mistake. My first mistake in 1095 days. I had been seen. The next Thursday, he came at 3. The air was still. I prepared the Darjeeling, the water heated to 85 degrees. I carried the tray to his table, my movements as smooth and practiced as a ritual. I expected the indifference to have returned, the brief crack in my invisibility to have been sealed over. I was wrong. As I placed the teapot on the table, he spoke. His voice was a low rumble, quiet but resonant, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised to command a room. "You handled that well. Tuesday." It was not a compliment. It was a statement of fact. It unnerved me more than any praise could have. I did not look at him. I continued my task, arranging the cup and saucer. "Thank you, sir." My voice was rust, unused for anything more than a recitation of the day's specials. I began to retreat. "Wait." My feet stopped. I did not want them to, but they did. I kept my back to him, a small, pathetic act of defiance. I waited. 11 seconds of silence passed. I counted each one. The silence stretched, pulling taut between us. Then, "I will have the gyokuro today." He had never ordered the gyokuro. It was a delicate, expensive green tea that required a lower water temperature and a precise, 3-minute infusion. It was a tea that required patience. It required care. It was my favorite. I told myself it was a coincidence. I told myself he was simply bored of the Darjeeling. I turned a small, stiff bow of my head. "Of course, sir." As I walked back to the preparation counter, I could feel his eyes on me, a steady, unnerving pressure. This was the second mistake. Allowing the first one to be compounded. From that day on, the pattern was broken. The old rhythm was gone, replaced by something new and unsettling. He still came at 3 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but the certainties ended there. He never ordered the Darjeeling again. Each time, it was a different tea, always something complex and demanding. A silver needle white, a rare Dankong oolong, a smoky Lapsang souchong. Each was a test. A test of my knowledge, my precision. A test I passed every time. He would watch me prepared at the counter, his gaze unwavering. And he would speak. A single sentence. A quiet observation. The rain has stopped. The traffic is worse today. That shade of blue is new on the Namsan Tower. Mundane statements that felt freighted with meaning. He was mapping the world, and I was, for some reason, the fixed point from which he took his bearings. The other staff noticed. The whispers in the kitchen changed. They were no longer just about him, they were about me. Why does he only talk to her? What did she do? Their fear of him was transferred, diluted, onto me. They gave me a wide berth. My invisibility was curdling into isolation. One Monday, I arrived to find a small, lacquered box in my locker. It was black, adorned with a single mother-of-pearl crane. There was no note. Inside, nestled on a bed of crimson silk, was a small cake of aged purt, the kind that costs more per gram than gold. It was dated 1987. A fortune in a 5-inch box. I knew, with a certainty that left no room for doubt, who it was from. My first impulse was to throw it away. It was a brand, a mark of ownership. It was a complication I could not afford. I stood in the sterile white of the staff changing room, the box heavy in my hand, and I thought about the life I had fled. I thought of Lee Jae-wook, the man my father had promised me to. His gifts had been ostentatious, flashy things meant to demonstrate his wealth, cars, diamonds, couture. They were public declarations of his claim. This was different. This was silent. This was personal. This was something chosen for its essence, not its price tag. I told myself it was a test, another one of his quiet power plays. I should have left it. I should have feigned ignorance. I took it home. I hid the box in the back of my closet, behind a stack of grey sweaters. A secret I was now keeping for him. The week that followed was one of silence. He came on Tuesday, and then on Thursday. He sat in his corner booth. I served him a standard censure, my hand steady, my expression blank. He did not speak. He did not ask for anything different. He just watched me, his dark eyes holding a question I refused to answer. The silence was heavier than ever, dense with the unspoken acknowledgement of the gift. It was a standoff. The standoff broke on a Tuesday in early December. A brutal, cold wind whipped through the city, rattling the windows of the 47th floor. I had worked a double shift, my body aching with a fatigue that went bone deep. By the time I left, it was nearly midnight. The streets were slick with a thin, treacherous layer of ice. The bus was delayed. I stood at the stop, huddled in my thin coat, the wind cutting through me like a blade. My umbrella, a cheap thing I'd bought at a convenience store, had been mangled by a gust of wind the week before. I'd meant to replace it. I was calculating the distance to my apartment, a miserable 15-minute walk, when the black sedan materialized at the curb beside me. It was so quiet I didn't hear it approach, it was simply there, a slice of impossible darkness against the wet, gleaming street. The passenger window slid down with a faint whir. Mr. Choi was at the wheel. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, then inclined his head toward the empty passenger seat. I should have said no. Every instinct for survival, honed over 3 years of careful self-preservation, screamed at me to refuse. To be seen getting into that car was to be marked, to accept a protection that felt like a cage. I am fine, I started to say, the reflexive words of deflection already on my lips. But the wind chose that moment to drive a sliver of icy rain down the back of my neck, and the words died in my throat. I was not fine. I was cold and tired, and my carefully constructed independence suddenly felt like a hollow, foolish thing. I hesitated for 3 seconds. I counted them. 1. The memory of Jae-wook's cold smile. 2. The feel of the lacquered box hidden in my closet. 3. The bone-deep weariness of fighting alone. I walked around the car and got in. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing out the wind and the world. The interior was warm and smelled faintly of leather and his tea. Silence. Mr. Choi put the car in motion. He didn't ask for my address. He didn't need to. Of course he didn't. We drove through the sleeping city, the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers the only sound. I stared out the window, watching the blur of lights, my own reflection a pale, ghostly superimposed image. I felt, impossibly, like I was being taken home. I told myself it was just a ride. I told myself it meant nothing. But when he dropped me at the corner of my street, not directly in front of my building, a small, considerate act of discretion, and I walked the final 20 meters, the warmth of the car still clung to me. The next day, a new umbrella, sturdy and black with a simple, elegant bamboo handle, was leaning against my locker. There was no note. There didn't need to be. My carefully guarded anonymity was fraying at the edges. My life, once a straight, predictable line, was now veering into uncharted territory. The ride in his car, the umbrella, they were small things, but they were ties. Strands of silk, nearly invisible, but binding me to him nonetheless. I tried to pull back. I asked my manager to switch my shifts, to move me to the morning rotation when he was never there. She just gave me a pitying look. Mr. Kwon has requested that you remain on the afternoon schedule. It has been noted how efficient you are. There it was. The quiet, unassailable power that bent the world to his will without a single raised voice. I was not being asked. I was being told. My resentment was a hot, bitter stone in my chest. I would not be managed. I would not be handled. I would not be kept. The words were a silent mantra, a shield against the growing certainty that I was already all of those things. The next time he came in, I was cold. My movements were precise but brittle. I served his tea, a complex, floral phoenix oolong, without a word, my face a mask of professional neutrality. He watched me, his head tilted slightly. When I turned to leave, he spoke, his voice as quiet as ever. You are angry. Another statement of fact. It stripped the breath from my lungs. Yes, the word escaped me before I could stop it. It was a whisper, but in the cavernous silence of the tea room, it felt like a shout. He considered this for a moment. He looked out the window at the city below, a tapestry of glittering lights against the encroaching dusk. Then he looked back at me. Good, he said. It was so unexpected, so utterly baffling, that my anger faltered, replaced by confusion. He took a sip of his tea. Then he did something he had never done before. The corner of his mouth lifted, a bare, fractional twitch. It was not a smile. It was the memory of a smile, the ghost of an expression that arrived and left in the same instant. An almost smile. And then it was gone. But I had seen it. I knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity, that I had been waiting for it. December deepened, the city holding its breath under a blanket of grey sky. The end of the year brought a frantic energy, but in the gilded lotus, time seemed to slow, insulated from the rush. My life was divided into two distinct realities. The one within the tea room, a slow-motion dance of tea and silence with Kwon Ji-hoon, and the one outside, my small, colorless existence. I clung to the latter. I made my apartment even more Spartan, my routines even more rigid, as if to counteract the subtle luxuries, the tea, the umbrella, the memory of a warm car, that was seeping into my life. I was trying to prove something to myself. That I was still in control. That I could still walk away. That I was still Kim Minute-seo, the invisible woman. Then the phone call came. It was a Wednesday night, just after 10. An unknown number. My heart seized. I had only given my number to one person, my old university friend, Sora. We had a protocol. No calls unless it was an emergency. I answered, my hand trembling. Minute-sayo. Sora's voice was thin, stretched with panic. I told you not to call this number. Where are you? Are you okay? Her questions tumbled out, frantic. I'm fine, Sora. What's wrong? There was a pause, a shaky, indrawn breath. He sent someone. Not to me, not to my parents. To my grandmother. In Busan. He just sent a man to have tea with my grandmother. She didn't understand the implication, but I did. Lee Jae-wook. The name was a shard of ice in my gut. After 3 years of silence, he was stirring. He wasn't looking for me. Not directly. He was shaking the tree, checking to see what fell out. My grandmother is old, Minute-sayo. The man was very polite. He brought an expensive gift. He just asked how I was doing, if I ever heard from my old friends from school. The message was clear. I can reach anyone you have ever cared about. I sank onto my small, hard bed, the room tilting around me. The carefully constructed walls of my sanctuary were nothing but glass. He could shatter them with a word. Stay calm, Sora. He doesn't know anything. It's a fishing expedition. Don't contact me again. Not for any reason. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I hung up, my finger hovering over the end call button for a long moment. Past tense. Our friendship was now past tense. I had just cut my last tie to my old life. The silence in my tiny apartment was absolute. It was no longer the silence of peace, but the silence of a tomb. For the first time in 3 years, I was truly, completely alone. And I was afraid. The fear was a living thing, cold and sharp. It had been my constant companion when I first ran, but I had starved it with routine and invisibility. Now, it was back, and it was ravenous. The fear changed everything. It sharpened my senses. Every footstep behind me on the street was a threat. Every unfamiliar face in the crowd was an agent of Jae-wook. I started counting things again, an old habit from a time of stress. 118 tiles from my apartment door to the bus stop. 24 street lights. 7 cracks in the pavement. It was a way to impose order on a world that felt like it was spiraling out of my control. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it was just a message, a warning. Jae-wook was arrogant. He liked to play with his food. But the feeling of being watched was undeniable. It was a prickling sensation on my skin, a constant awareness that I was no longer just an anonymous face in the city. At work, my control became brittle. My hands, usually so steady, had a fine tremor. I nearly dropped a cup. Kwon Ji-hoon was there, that Thursday. He watched me, his eyes missing nothing. The tremor in my hand. The new, hunted look in my eyes. He didn't comment on it. He ordered a simple hojika, a roasted green tea, something comforting and uncomplicated. He drank it in silence. But when I came to clear the table, he left something behind. Tucked under his saucer was a small, folded piece of paper. Not a note. It was a business card. It was thick, creamy cardstock, embossed with a single, stylized character I didn't recognize. On the back, a phone number was handwritten in neat, precise script. Just that. A number. No name. No instructions. I stared at it. It felt heavier than a brick in my hand. It was an offer. It was a lifeline. It was also a point of no return. Taking it felt like a betrayal of the person I had fought so hard to be for the last 3 years, the woman who needed no one. I slipped the card into my pocket. My hand was perfectly steady. The tremor was gone. I did not use the number. I carried the card with me like a talisman, a secret source of heat in my pocket, but I refused to make the call. To do so would be to admit defeat. It would be to hand the reins of my life to someone else. I would not do it. I would handle this myself. I started making plans. I researched new cities, new countries. Places where a person could disappear. But the logistics were overwhelming. I had so little money. My passport was under my old name. The web was closing in, and my options were dwindling. I felt like an animal in a trap, chewing its own leg off to get free. The week that followed was the longest of my life. 6 days of silence from the outside world, but a maelstrom in my head. I slept in 2-hour increments, waking with my heart pounding. The city outside my window, once a comforting blanket of anonymity, now felt like a labyrinth designed by my enemy. The threat, when it came, was not subtle. It was not a polite man having tea. It was a Friday night. I had just left the small grocery store near my apartment, my bag filled with meager provisions for the weekend. The alley I used as a shortcut was usually dimly lit but busy. Tonight, it was empty. A preternatural quiet hung in the air. The first thing I heard wasn't the footsteps. It was the silence before them. The sudden absence of the distant traffic hum. 2 men stepped out from behind a dumpster, blocking my path. They were nondescript, dressed in dark jackets, but they moved with a predatory confidence that made the air crackle. "We just want to talk," the first one said, a thin, cruel smile on his face. "My boss misses you." Lee Jae-wook. My blood ran cold. I clutched my grocery bag to my chest, the carton of milk a pathetic shield. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I took a step back. The second man appeared behind me, blocking my escape. The alley was a dead end. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I scanned the alley walls, the grimy brick, the fire escapes too high to reach. No escape. The first man took a step toward me, his hand reaching out. "Don't make this difficult. Just come with us." He was 2 feet away when the world dissolved into motion. It was so fast I almost didn't process it. One moment the man was reaching for me, the next he was on the ground, a dark shape having detached itself from the deeper shadows of the alley. Another shape dealt with the second man. It was brutal. It was silent. It was efficient. There were no shouts, only the sickening, wet thud of fists meeting flesh and bone. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The 2 men were unconscious, crumpled heaps on the wet ground. Standing over them was Mr. Choi. He didn't even look winded. He adjusted his coat, his expression impassive. He looked at me, my grocery bag still clutched to my chest, milk now leaking onto my shoes. His gaze flickered to the end of the alley. The black sedan was there, idling silently, its headlights cutting twin cones of light through the darkness. This time, there was no choice to be made. There was no polite offer to refuse. This was not a rescue. It was an acquisition. I dropped the bag of groceries and walked toward the car. The back door opened before I reached it. Kwon Ji-hoon was inside, waiting. The silence in the car was a physical presence. It was heavier than the leather seats, denser than the tinted glass that separated us from the world. I did not look at him. I stared straight ahead, at the back of Mr. Choi's granite head, and focused on the simple act of breathing. In. Out. My hands were clasped in my lap, so tight my knuckles were white. I could feel his gaze on me, just as I had felt it in the tea room, but here, in this confined space, it was unbearable. It stripped away the layers of my carefully constructed identity, the grey uniform, the severe bun, the downcast eyes, and left me raw and exposed. We drove. Not toward my apartment, with its pathetic illusion of safety. Not toward his building, the glass tower where I worked. We moved through the city's glittering veins, climbing higher and higher, into the rarefied air of the city's wealthiest enclaves. The car finally came to a stop in a subterranean garage, the silence absolute. Mr. Choi did not get out. The door beside me opened, and Kwon Ji-hoon was standing there. He did not offer a hand. He simply waited. I got out. He led me to a private elevator. The ride up was silent and swift. My ears popped. The doors opened directly into a penthouse apartment. It was not what I expected. There were no opulent displays of wealth, no gold or marble. The space was vast, a two-story cavern of glass, concrete, and dark wood. It was minimalist to the point of being monastic. The furniture was sparse, elegant, and looked profoundly uncomfortable. But the windows were everything. An entire wall was a sheet of glass, 2 stories high, looking out over the entirety of Seoul. The city was a carpet of diamonds spread at our feet, a breathtaking, indifferent spectacle. It was the view from the Gilded Lotus, but magnified, perfected. This was the view of a king from his throne. He led me to a seating area. A low black sofa, a single chair. He gestured to the sofa. I remained standing. I will not be handled, Kwon Ji-hoon. The words came out low and fierce, torn from some deep, inviolable part of me. I am not a stray dog you can rescue and expect to be grateful. I am not a piece on your board. My voice trembled with a rage that was fueled by 3 years of fear and suppression. He stood by the window, his back to me, looking down at the city. For a long time, he said nothing. He just let my anger hang in the air, a raw, discordant note in the perfect stillness of the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was unchanged. Quiet. Calm. Certain. Lee Jae-wook. He said the name. He said it without inflection, but it landed in the room like a stone, sending ripples through the silence. He knows you are in Seoul. He has known for 6 weeks. He was waiting. Testing my defenses. The words hung there. My defenses. He turned to face me. His face was shadowed, his expression unreadable. I have been aware of you, Minute-seo, for 187 days. He used my real name. The name I had not heard spoken aloud in 3 years. It was a key turning in a lock I had forgotten existed. My given name. Not the shadow name I had chosen. No, he corrected himself, his gaze intense. Not aware of you. I saw you. From the first day. You were trying to be invisible, but you were the most solid thing in the room. He took a step toward me. I saw the way you arranged the flowers, the precision. I saw the way you walked, as if you were trying to apologize for taking up space. I saw the person you were hiding, not the ghost you were pretending to be. I saw you. His words dismantled my defenses more effectively than any army could have. The anger drained out of me, replaced by a terrifying, vertiginous feeling. He saw me. He had always seen me. All my efforts, all my careful construction, had been for nothing. He had seen through it from the very beginning. My carefully guarded self, the one I had protected with anonymity and grey clothing, was laid bare under his quiet, factual pronouncements. I should have felt violated. I should have felt exposed. Instead, I felt a strange, hollow relief, as if a weight I had been carrying for 1,000 days had just been lifted. But the fighter in me, the survivor, was not ready to surrender. And what do you want? I asked, my voice steadier now. I a curiosity. A project. A damsel to be rescued and then owned. The words were sharp, meant to wound, to push him away. He absorbed them without flinching. He simply watched my face, his own expression unchanging. I want, he said, after a long pause, for you to be safe. It was the simplest of statements, but in his world, and in mine, safety was the most complex and valuable commodity. And you think I can only be safe with you? I challenged. In a cage, no matter how gilded. His eyes, dark and deep, held mine. This is not a cage, Minetseo. It is a fortress. And the door is not locked. He was offering me sanctuary, but on his terms, in his world. The power imbalance was staggering. He was the sun, and I was a small planet being pulled into his orbit. To accept was to give up the last vestiges of the control I had fought so desperately to maintain. To refuse was to walk back out into the alley, to face Lee Jae-wook and his faceless men alone. He saw the war on my face. He took another step closer, closing the space between us until only a few feet remained. The air grew thick, charged with unspoken things. Then he did something that cost him. I knew, instinctively, that it did. He broke his own code of contained certainty. He asked a question. Not a statement disguised as a question, but a true one, laced with a vulnerability that was more shocking than any display of power. Do you want his protection? Or mine? He did not say Jae-wook's name. He did not need to. The choice was laid bare. A life of running, of looking over my shoulder, of being hunted by a man who saw me as a possession he had lost. Or this. A life in the orbit of a man who was equally dangerous, but whose danger was directed outward, a shield instead of a sword. A man who saw me. I looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time without the filter of my fear or his reputation. Kwon Ji-hoon. The name came to my lips, but I did not say it aloud. Not yet. I saw the rigid control in his posture, the immense discipline it must take to be so still, to command so much with so little. And I saw, in the depths of his dark eyes, not the coldness of a predator, but the weary patience of a guardian. I have been protecting myself for 3 years, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I am very good at it. Yes, he agreed, a faint nod. You are. But you are tired. The simple truth of it, spoken so plainly, almost broke me. I was tired. I was bone-weary of being strong, of being alone, of being vigilant every second of every day. My shoulders, which I hadn't realized were tensed up to my ears, slumped. A single, traitorous tear traced a hot path down my cheek. I angrily brushed it away. He saw the gesture. He saw everything. He lifted his hand, slowly, as if not to startle me. I flinched, expecting a touch, a gesture of comfort that would feel like ownership. But he did not touch me. Instead, his fingers went to my hair, to the severe, tight bun that was the emblem of my hidden life. With an impossibly gentle touch, he found the pin that held it all in place and slid it free. My hair, released from its prison, cascaded down my back, a heavy curtain of black silk. It felt like an abdication. A surrender. He reached out again, his knuckles just barely grazing my jaw, as he tucked a stray strand behind my ear. The touch was electric, a spark of heat in the cold, sterile room. It was not a gesture of possession. It was a gesture of recognition. He was not unmaking me. He was revealing me. And in that moment, I made my choice. I stayed. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was a strategic retreat, a chance to regroup before I disappeared again, properly this time. I knew, even as I formed the thoughts, that I was lying. There is a moment, I know this now, when you stop falling and start choosing. My choice was made in the silence that followed his touch, in the quiet weight of my hair on my shoulders. The next morning, I woke up in a guest room that was larger than my entire apartment. The bed was a cloud, the sheets were silk. A closet stood open, filled with clothes in my size. They were simple, elegant things, cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, tailored trousers in shades of ivory, charcoal, and deep blue. There were no grey tunics. It was a wardrobe for a woman who was visible. For a woman who was present. I chose a simple black dress and went in search of him. I found him in a room I had not seen the night before. A greenhouse. It was a glass-enclosed atrium on the east side of the penthouse, a riot of green and life that was a stark contrast to the minimalist austerity of the rest of the apartment. Orchids, ferns, and strange, exotic plants I didn't recognize grew in profusion. The air was warm and humid and smelled of damp earth and blossoms. He was standing by a wall of white phalaenopsis, misting their leaves with a small silver spray bottle. He wore a simple grey t-shirt and dark trousers, and with the morning light filtering through the glass, he looked younger, less formidable. He looked calm. He turned as I entered, his eyes taking in the dress, my loose hair. He didn't comment. He simply inclined his head toward a small table where 2 cups of coffee were waiting. "You came," he said. It was not a question. It was the same thing he might have said if I had been 5 minutes late with his tea. A statement of an observed fact. I came, I confirmed. We drank our coffee in silence, the only sounds the drip of water from a leaf, the distant hum of the city waking up below. The question of Lee Jae-wook hung in the air between us, a toxic, unspoken cloud. I needed to know. "What happens now?" I asked. He looked at me over the rim of his cup, his gaze steady. "Nothing," he said. "It is handled." Handled. The word was so clean, so final. It was the word of a man who moved mountains and called it tidying up. A few days later, I saw a small article on an international news site I was scrolling through on a tablet he had left for me. A prominent young executive, Lee Jae-wook, had been detained in Macau. Something about illegal gambling, ties to organized crime. His family's company stock had plummeted. He was facing years in prison. His name, once a source of terror, was now just a headline. He was gone, erased from my life as cleanly as a line of code. Kwon Ji-hoon never mentioned it. He never said "I told you so." He never used it to indebt me to him. He had simply removed the threat, and we moved on. Life in the fortress, as he called it, was a strange new reality. It was a world of immense quiet and solitude. He was gone for long stretches of the day, and sometimes for days at a time. He never explained where he went or what he did. I never asked. His world operated on a level of discretion and secrecy that I was only beginning to understand. His staff, a small, unobtrusive team, moved through the penthouse like ghosts. They were led by a woman named Mrs. Kim, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with kind eyes. She had been his mother's attendant, and had looked after him since he was a boy. The first time she saw me, she bowed deeply, her gaze respectful. She showed me the intricacies of the house, the lighting systems, the kitchen that could produce any meal with a few words into a small speaker, the library filled with first editions. She did it not as one would instruct a guest, but as one would orient the new lady of the house. She brought me tea, the gyokuro I loved, without me asking. She left a vase of fresh peonies on my bedside table, because she saw me admiring them in the greenhouse. They were small, quiet gestures of care, signals of acceptance. They were, I realized, how he communicated his own care, through intermediaries. The greenhouse became my sanctuary. It was the one place in the vast, silent penthouse that felt truly alive. I started spending my days there, learning the names of the plants, their needs, their rhythms. I learned to prune the orchids, to repot the ferns, to coax new life from dormant seeds. I had always been good with my hands, and here, there was something to create, not just maintain. My work at the Gilded Lotus had been about precision, about following rules. This was about instinct, about nurturing. One afternoon, a woman came to visit. She was older, impossibly elegant, with a sharp intelligence in her eyes. She was introduced to me as Madame Yo, a friend of Ji-hoon's late mother. He was not there. She and I sat in the greenhouse and had tea. She talked about Ji-hoon as a boy, a quiet, serious child who preferred the company of books and plants to people. He built this greenhouse for his mother, she told me, her eyes on a blooming orchid. She loved it here. After she passed, he let it go to ruin. 4 years, it was just dead. Until recently. She looked around at the vibrant life, and then she looked at me. He is a man who protects what is his, she said, her voice soft but clear. But he has never known how to hold something without crushing it. He is learning. Her words were a key, unlocking a part of him I hadn't understood. His control wasn't about power. It was about fear. The fear of loss. I was not a possession he was protecting. I was a garden he was learning to tend. That night, when he returned, I was waiting for him in the greenhouse. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. He stopped in the doorway, just looking at me among the plants. The silence stretched. I used to think my life had to be small to be safe, I said, the words coming out in a rush of sudden honesty. I thought if no one saw me, no one could hurt me. He walked toward me, his movements slow, deliberate. He stopped in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "And now?" he asked. His voice was a low murmur. "Now," I replied, my gaze locked on his, "I think safety isn't about being invisible. It's about being seen by the right person." An almost smile touched his lips. It stayed for 3 whole seconds. I counted. 3 weeks passed. Then a month. December arrived, dusting the city in a fine layer of snow. The world outside the glass walls of the penthouse seemed very far away. My life, which had been a frantic, desperate scramble for survival,